myself out.
Oh, that little ditty there brought to us by the one and only Rhyss Ashmore. Well done, mate. What a tune. A little bit different way to bring in the show. Of course, this is the Top Step podcast here. 17th show, post-Canadian Grand Prix. Welcome, mate.
Welcome. Hello. Thank you.
Now, I have to make an admission. We've already done this before, probably about 30 minutes worth of the show, until I realised that I had not pressed the record button. So, the traditional crack of the cans has been done, to be honest. We're already into them, and it's probably appropriate that this feels like Groundhog Day, given where we have been racing over the weekend. And I tell you what,
purpose, didn't you?
We've just finished some of the best work I've ever heard us do, and you're all going to miss out, which is really, really disappointing for you. So
this is just going to be a tribute. So you've got to believe us.
You need to get us to 1,000 followers on TikTok so we can do this live, and then there won't be any of these issues. But let's get back through what we've already spoken about. That little jig at the top there, brought to you by Rhyss, is just about everything that we're going to do in terms of the Lando Norris bashing tonight, because we had actually just finished saying what a great race he did have up until that point. So we'll get back into that, of course.
Not to skate past it. We're not going to hold on to it too much. But did someone predict that this was going to happen? I can't remember his name. What was his name again?
His name was Nostradamus. It took me a while to come up with that one, but Nostradamus. I did say that the two McLarens were going to run into one another, and I tell you, I was as shocked as everyone else when it actually happened. But when you know motorsport as well as we do, and you get things almost right, it was bound to happen. It's not the first time we've got stuff right that we've predicted. So, if you want to know what's going to happen, just tune in here and you'll get the full lie of the land. Let's get straight into it. Let's have a chat about qualifying at the Canadian Grand Prix. So there's a few things here that I want to touch on, and we're going to have a bit more of a conversation about tyres a little later on in the show. But again, a story of tyre strategy with George Russell taking out pole position on the medium compound tyre ahead of Max Verstappen and Oscar Piastri.
Yep. Max also on the medium tyre as well.
Yeah, and Kimi Antonelli in fourth on a used set of medium tyres, still managing to get ahead of Hamilton, Alonso. Lando Norris, not in that context, made a mistake again on his push lap and wasn't quite able to get the job done, so finished in P7.
I'm not going to rag on him because we keep talking about his growth as a driver, but just overdriving the car again, unfortunately, and he sort of said it himself, but I think big time just overdriving the car.
Yeah, absolutely. Leclerc in 8th, Isaac Hadjar qualifying in 9th, but of course getting that 3-place grid penalty that we'll talk about in a moment. And Alexander Albon rounding out the top 10. So we'll switch straight to that. Carlos Sainz, P17, impeded by Isaac Hadjar. We spoke about it before the show. Communication issues, again, big this weekend.
Yeah, I can't see how, obviously we keep seeing it happen, but there's people in these teams that are meant to be doing this exact job. Like that's their job to let them know. As soon as he came through, he's like, what's he doing? I thought that he, had aborted his lap, and his team came back to him and said, I don't know, Isaac. And that's crazy because as a driver's point of view, you don't know what's going on behind you. The way Canada's set up is so much like a street circuit that it's a full racetrack that you can't see where people are coming, but you also don't know if they're just warming up their tyres, if they're just going to get close to you and get on the brakes and harvesting or whatever they are doing. So that's where they really need to rely on their teams. And we just keep seeing this communication fall over and with no real excuses for it because they've got the timing boards, they've got the radio messages, they've got everything just in front of them.
Yeah, and there's a team back at wherever their head office is as well, like looking at the data and working through all this stuff as well. So they're big teams, as you say, and their simple mistakes to avoid. Having said that, it is, as you say, like the nature of the track that it is. It's quite congested as well. It happened in free practice one, so it's difficult to move. It's not the widest circuit in the world, so it's difficult to shift off the racing line when half the track is basically corners and the other half of the track is one long straight. So it wasn't a great look for Hadjar, unfortunately, and it meant that Carlos missed out on FP2 and anything further.
2/10 of a second too. Like he was right there and impeded. I think he said impeded by over 6/10. So like he would have been in comfortably into Q2. So
yeah, and you only have to look where Alex finished up. And they were neck and neck through the whole weekend. They rolled out of the truck with a pretty decent car. If you look at FP1 and FP2, I think they were 1 and 2 in FP1, and they was in the top 3, I think, in FP2. So yeah, rolling out with a quick car and just having it impeded. So speaking of impeded, Pierre Gasly impeded nobody's weekend, which was great. He qualified dead last.
Just hanging out at the back by himself.
Even Liam Lawson, similar. He came in and said, I don't know what went wrong with that lap. A little bit like Yuki before him last week, saying, it was a good lap, it just wasn't quick. Lance Stroll, 18th. What did you think of his demeanour over the weekend, mate? What did you make of that?
You can't tell me that he was interested in being there whatsoever. We talked about him having the tantrum last weekend, and we had people come back to us and say, "Oh, he didn't have a tantrum." No, he did. Look at him this weekend. He's the first time he's let out after being grounded for however many weeks. I have never seen anyone so disinterested in being at a Formula One race, let alone being a driver at your home race. Every driver that you see racing at their home race is excited. Well, everyone at every race, but at their home race especially, they're doing all the crowd work. They're seeing their fans. They're doing all that sort of stuff. He was looking at his shoes in the driver's possession, just not doing anything. It was,
I did see a photo of that. And you talk about it, like they were talking to George in the post-race, and they're talking about him potentially, being competitive at Silverstone and the good development, particularly on the cooler track. The Mercedes seems to perform better. Yeah, and it's weeks away. And he was like, I can't wait to get to Silverstone and be at home in front of the home fans and So you're spot on. I wonder if he's been told that the writing's on the wall.
Well, I said last week that it would have been the perfect time for them to politely get him out of the car in a way that's not going to raise eyebrows or get anyone having any more tantrums or anything like that. But obviously he was back this weekend, but I don't know why. Especially not after coming back from injury as well and not racing at the last race. I'd be itching to get back in that seat. But whatever fight that these guys are meant to have in them, he just doesn't have it.
Go on.
I was going to say, his tenure as well, he's been racing for years now, and just seeing where he's at, his attitude and everything, it just stinks.
Yeah, I wonder if maybe he's keeping that seat warm for George.
Okay.
Or somebody else, and he's been told that because, there's plenty of driver market available, and I think everyone's going to think that they're going to have a pretty good car straight out of the bat next season with it, and they will already be focusing on next season, of course. With
do you think that's why he pushed so hard in free practice?
Yeah, I mean, he just drove. He didn't drive straight into the wall. There's somebody else that did that, but I mean, he just went wide and just kept the gun on it, and then just clouded the wall. So
for what reason?
It's the sort of behaviour you'd expect from a rookie.
Yeah, no, and that's what I say. With his tenure, it just doesn't make sense. But talking about driving straight through, you did mention that we did see someone else do that in free practice.
Oh, Charles decided to test the durability of the left-hand side of the Ferrari by going straight ahead at turn 3 and 4 like it wasn't there. So
the car didn't win.
No. And of course his qualifying result probably reflects the fact that they had to spend free practice 2 repairing that car. So, but we get into the race, and I was a little bit surprised is that the right word? Surprise. The race itself, there wasn't a lot in it. I mean, the early mention of a power unit issue for another Mercedes back motor in Williams was frustrating to hear after Carlos Sainz. After
Albon.
Alexander Albon decided to do a Dukes of Hazzard impression over 3 and 4. Maybe that contributed to it. They didn't sort of mention it until a bit later.
I did think about that, but then they were saying that it was having cooling issues, and it had. I think they said it had a coolant leak, water leak. So
similar to Spain.
Yeah, which I'm not sure. Maybe mowing the grass might have got a stone up and chipped something. I'm not sure, but they also had we didn't mention this either, but they also had the engine cover explode off their car in
well, that was in quali.
In quali, yeah. Sorry,
yeah, it was in Q1.
Yeah, so they've had some things going on.
It wasn't a great weekend for Williams on the whole, but yeah, with the power unit issues for Mercedes with heat, they won't be too disappointed to be heading across to Europe, albeit it is summer over there. A race of tyres again. The start from George was good, beating Max. Max bogged down off the start. Colapinto's start was really, really good, and was race defining for him because it did get him ahead of Oscar.
Antonelli.
Yes, would I say Colapinto?
Yeah, I was like,
God, terrible. Yes, Antonelli, Kimi. Sorry, Kimi. Yeah. He had an amazing
massive start. Yeah, great start.
And brave as well.
Yep.
Which is something we've spoken about for other drivers potentially not being able to do that.
I think after he's had a couple of incidents now, a sequence of incidents. I think hearing him speak and watching him sort of race, I think he needed to prove himself to himself, and I think him doing that on the weekend would have sort of given back that confidence that he sort of lost over the last couple of weeks with a couple of incidents.
Yeah, no, definitely right. But a really good start from him. But other than that, the race sort of just trundled along until we got to late in the race when we started to see Lando drove long on those hard tyres. There was a lot of undercuts done across the two-stop strategies that were being run.
And this is correct me if I'm wrong. I think this is the second. Could be the third, but I think it's the second time he's done that this season where he hasn't qualified that well. The top guys have had to pit earlier because they're pushing harder, and he's sort of managed his tyres, and then he's got out into the free air and just run deep. And it's a great strategy, and it did almost worked out for them. But I do want to say that Charles Leclerc did that as well, and I'm fairly sure the last time Lando did it, Charles Leclerc went with him, and they both did that same strategy. But talking about tyres, I did want to mention when Lando pitted, they went from the hard to the medium.
Yep.
When Charles pitted, he went from hard to hard, meaning that no matter what happens, they went long. They went second longest in the top guys. They still had to pit for a third time. So if they were waiting on like a safety car or something like that, but no matter what happened, they always had to pit a second time. So not only did they run deep, they ran hard, so they had to change over to get the two tyre compounds, which I just can't make sense of. I can't make any sense of in that position where you've come up the field, you've run deep, you've gotten that, put a medium on, because then the race finished under a safety car.
Fred is in big trouble.
Yeah,
because they don't fire head office; they fire the person on the ground, even though that's going to be the wrong decision for them. But they have serious, like it sounded to me. So Lewis, partway through the race, probably halfway through the race, said that he was in no man's land. He was running around by himself. Now he had floor damage from running into Jacques Villeneuve, so we found out later on. But it sounded like he didn't know he had floor damage and that he was 20 points down on aero. So why didn't he know that and then be able to sort of reconcile, because he's a reasonably intelligent bloke, that he was slower and in no man's land because he didn't really have any other choice because the car was damaged. And then the Charles thing that you've just outlined, like they can't get out of the way of themselves. Charles was even on the radio saying, "I love the medium tire. Give me the medium tire. Why aren't I on the medium tire? Everyone else on the medium tire is doing well." And they just like, nah, you can have the hard tire.
But they even wanted to pit him earlier, and he's like, "No, what? Like, why are we pitting? Like, why am I pitting now? I don't like." The same thing happened with Albon.
Yep.
Like the tire was working. Albon's not so much. He was getting overtaken left, right, and center. But Charles was. It was working for him.
Yeah, but I mean, Alex was trying to push as long as he could to
Yeah.
run on a one-stop strategy to try and make something out of the race. And we heard it as well from Fernando talking back, telling the pit wall what to do when they told him to stop pushing on the tires, and he's like, "We're not doing testing, we're racing."
Yeah, like easy through corners 3 and 4 or something like that. Like,
And he's like, "No,
no,
leave me alone.
yeah,
I'm racing." So, but I mean, in terms of results, George Russell managed to convert the pole to a win. Max Verstappen second, and Kimi Antonelli becoming the third youngest podium sitter behind Max Verstappen and Lance Stroll. So he's managed to get that.
A crazy statistic that he has.
I had to double check it. Your man, Nico Hulkenberg.
Woo, my man.
Points
Again.
2 weeks in a row. I think that you're the only reason he's getting in the points.
Yeah, he tunes into the show. I text him after, just let him know how we're thinking of him. And
Esteban Ocon in ninth for Haas, just sort of snuck in there, and Carlos Sainz into 10th. So good recovery from him.
I was so happy to see that Carlos got into the points because he should have started a whole lot further up and competing with, Charles and Lewis. I think that's where he probably would have slotted into closer, having that battle. It's probably between Alonso, Hamilton, and Leclerc. So I was very happy to see them, and especially the weekend for them was probably, well, for Alex especially, was a weekend to forget, and the qualifying was a weekend to forget for Sainz. So I was very, very excited to see him up there.
Now, I do want to touch quickly, of course, we've got Rhyss Ranksome in a little bit, but I do just want to touch quickly on Lando's race, because to that point, when the incident happened, I reckon that's the best racing I've seen from him.
It's getting better every single week. It really is.
The thing that I struggled with is that his race engineer had to tell him to do it.
I'm glad you. I'm glad that you brought that up because
discuss what, why.
He's their senior driver. Like, I know that we don't have a 1 and a 2 in papaya rules, but he is their senior driver.
Not in our world, he's not.
No, he's not. But on team paper, and tenant, he is their.
He's the more experienced driver.
Yes.
Yep.
But every time we hear things come across the radio and telling them, look, Oscar did this, do this, like telling him how to battle Oscar, like he's missing something.
I heard Martin Brundle mention, I think it was Martin, that he'd heard Lando asking how Oscar was driving on certain parts of the track on the dummy grid. And I was just like, really? Like that late? And they're selling it like it's, he's trying to eke out the last 10th. And I'm thinking, if you're thinking about how somebody else is driving the track, when you're formed up about to start the race, you're probably in trouble. Yeah, but he did drive really well. Like he managed his tyres well. And that last sequence before they ran into one another was great racing. But the difference is, and this is a perfect segue into the next topic of conversation, the difference is that his teammates in the past haven't necessarily been people that he's needed to race. And now he has a teammate who won't just let him blow through because he's the lead driver, and Oscar raced. So you brought up an interesting piece of information about a comparison between Danny Rick and Max Verstappen's first 3 seasons and Lando and Oscar's first 3 seasons. Do you want to take us through that?
big time. So it's talking about Groundhog Day and things like that. It's definitely it seems very familiar. Like we've seen all of this before. So we go back to 2016 with a young Max Verstappen versus the leading driver of Daniel Ricciardo. Um, and head to head in 2016, they both had a win. Qualifying head to head was 11-6 Daniel's way, and then 220 points, 191 points Daniel's way again. 2017, we had one win for Ricardo, 2 wins for Verstappen, 9 podiums for Ricardo, however, and 4 podiums for Max. And back then, there was a lot of talk about Ricardo's consistency over Max's one lap pace. Now, that's again what we're seeing in terms of the one lap pace and the consistency going into that. So we're also now going through 2 seasons we're in the 3rd season of Oscar Lando, where 2 seasons Lando has beaten Oscar head to head, and now we're in their 3rd season where we're seeing him Oscar eke out in front of him. So the similarities are uncanny, and we know how this ended at the end of 2018 for Daniel Ricciardo, and how is this going to end at the end of 2025 for Lando?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting comparison, and I mean, even character-wise, if you look at the jocular nature of Danny Rick, and the jock support role that Lando Norris plays.
Yeah.
But then the seriousness and the racecraft of Oscar and Max in those 2 teams, it's a very, very uncanny similarity between the two pair.
Do I also want to bring up two teammates racing each other, with the junior guy in ahead and the senior guy racing in behind him and colliding from behind? The famous scenes of Daniel Ricciardo's late braking into the tail of Max Verstappen and taking them both out of the race. And thankfully that didn't happen as cut and paste this time for Oscar, but history seems to be repeating itself.
And I think where it's at the moment, so we've seen a few mistakes from Lando, and we haven't seen any of that from Oscar. We've seen Oscar concede that he hasn't had strong weekends, and that was the first time as well. Let's remember, in 8 races that he's finished outside.
He was one race off beating Lewis's
record at McLaren
of 8 in a row.
So I don't know. I don't want to get slammed again for saying that it's over, but 22 points. I get it before you put it in the comments that 25 points is a race win and all he needs is to not finish and rah, rah, rah. That's all true. And yes, all of that can happen. But reliability-wise, McLaren's been good. So you can't see that being an issue for them. And if Oscar keeps qualifying as well as he does, race incidents probably aren't going to be an issue for him either.
Well, we look at we're talking about that mistake. Look at Max is very similar in that regard, where not often does he make a race-ending mistake, but he has not as great weekends, where we see Lando making those, massive mistakes.
You would bet your house on Max Verstappen not making the mistake that Lando Norris made this weekend.
Oh, no, absolutely. Yeah, no.
So I think Lando took the advice of Ayrton Senna far too literally, and he saw a gap. He just didn't consider whether or not he could fit his car into it.
Didn't realise it was 3 foot, not 7 foot wide.
Before deciding that he was a race driver. Anyway, look, it was a great piece of journalism by you there to discover that piece of information, and intriguing to see the similarities. Of course, we know what happened. Our man Danny made the terrible, terrible decision to go and join Renault.
And
um,
after,
and
mind
end
you,
his
as well,
career.
of having, he did have an offer from, and this is where I sort of dive a little bit deeper and probably a little bit tinfoil hat like, but Daniel did have an offer from Red Bull to stay on,
Of
but
course,
he didn't see himself being able to
number
be
two.
the lead driver. And that, I feel like, is where Lando is heading. And that's where this all sort of started, is that if Oscar wins the world championship this year, if he wins the drivers' world championship this year, it's going to be clear next year what they're going to do, like who they're going to favour. And I know they've got papaya rules, but it's going to be clear that they're going to go, cool, let's do it again.
Sure, they could have come up with a better name for it than papaya rules.
Mm.
Anyway, absolutely so, and he's still got a contract and all that sort of stuff. So he'll
But
no doubt he'll stick around because there may not be any. There's probably no better place to go knowingly because of the fact that the cars are changing. But beyond next year, he obviously will have a much clearer window of where he might want to go.
Yep.
So that brings us to the standings after the Canadian Grand Prix. And our man Oscar stretched his lead. And again, I'm not going to harp on it, but a massive impact from Lando not just finishing the race rather than racing to finish. Is the extension 10 points lost in not finishing the race where he would have, which opens the gap to Piastri to 22 points. And then you've got Max closing the gap to 21 points behind Lando as well. So still the top three, but the gap's obviously closing. Antonelli moving up to 63 points in pursuit of that. Was it 104?
I'm just going to agree.
We'll say something like that. It was around 100.
Escapes my brain.
And Ferrari and everyone still saying Hamilton's having a terrible season. He has more points still now than he did at this point last season in the McLaren, in the Mercedes, and obviously has more points than Kimi Antonelli in what would have been his car. So Alex Albon inside the top 10, Ocon's still there, and Isaac Hadjar remains inside the top 10. So two rookies in the top 10 as well. Really, really, really good to see that they're there. Team championship wise, we had already called this months ago. McLaren still have this sewn up, but Mercedes have moved up into second place ahead of Ferrari. And Max Verstappen is in fourth, with Williams a long way behind after their weekend. They need to have some more consistency if they can get there. And they'll be stoked with where they're at. 55 points is 55 points more than they had this time last year. But probably still disappointed with the momentum that they've got.
I want to point out that Haas has just sort of appeared again in terms of just picking up those like those last little points. They haven't really been a talking point, and we've said a few times that they're not performing as well as sort of what I was expecting this year, and maybe some that mechanics response to Ocon's probably still there, but they're still up in sixth, like ahead of Racing Bulls, ahead of Aston Martin, which for Haas team they'd be stoked about.
Because it's a consistency thing.
Yeah, and they are the smallest team on the grid, so sitting sixth is still a phenomenal effort.
Yeah, it's just a consistency thing. Racing Bulls, a couple of weekends in a row now where Liam's had issues.
Yeah,
or finished outside the points, so they're down to a one-driver point scoring machine. And Williams have sort of had the same thing, whether it be Carlos or Alex. You know who will be kicking themselves is Alpine. Because there's no way at the start of the season that they would have thought that they were going to finish below Kick Sauber.
Can you?
I can't see them not at the moment with the way that Bortoletto's improved. Obviously, the Hulk is doing smashing things
every weekend. Yeah.
So Aston Martin being a one-driver team as well. I mean, look, you could see Kick getting up into 8th or 7th.
Well, they were eighth before, but they were eighth before the weekend. They've dropped one. They've dropped back down to 9th because of obviously Fernando finishing that far ahead of or finishing ahead of the Hulk. But can you imagine, like, Kick beating Aston Martin with an endless checkbook and beating Alpine in the championship.
Well, we both had Kick dead last.
Yeah, no,
I think if we go back and look at the tape, that I don't even think we had them scoring points.
no.
And they've got 20 more than I thought they'd get. So,
but it wasn't even driver based. Like
no,
I think,
not at all.
I
It
think
was
I
tractor
said,
based.
yeah, I think I said back then that I was a bit sad to see the Hulk go from the Haas and Bortoleto go into Kick, just because they're not going to have that power until next season. But far out, that's just awesome.
I'm pretty sure I saw one of their cars on Clarkson's farm when I was watching it the other week. Wasn't that the one the new tractor he got? Wasn't that a
John
Kick
Deere?
Sauber? Anyway, so that's the end of the team standings. Not too much change there in terms of surprises, but the bottom of the table, those points that they desperately try and get, looking very, very interesting indeed. We'll check in on our race predictions and see who got what, and then we might have a look at Rhyss ranks them. An interesting weekend for us for predictions with, the biggest mover prediction. Now, it probably went either way because you picked Sainz and I picked Fernando. Sorry, this is surprise packet. Sainz and Alonso. Sainz probably more a biggest mover. And Alonso probably the surprise packet, I reckon, the winner.
Big time, yep.
You went Hulkenberg, of course, for biggest mover, and I went Bortoleto. I'll give that one to you for the Hulk because he finished in the points. Pole position, Oscar or Lando. Neither of us got that right. Winner, Oscar or Leclerc. Neither of us got that right. Liam Lawson and Stroll, Wall of Champions. Neither of us got that right. So a pretty ordinary weekend for our predictions. I just wanted to make mention, did you see the Hulk avoid the Wall of Champions?
Oh, yeah,
He did the best 360 you've ever seen, right past it. It was like Ken Block would have been proud.
Yeah, big time.
I think the wing winked at the wall on its way past it. It was amazing.
It got its number on the way through.
But of course, Oscar, the first person to hit Wall of Champions.
Yeah.
And we should have done it. I didn't even think about it. To the first person to see or hit a groundhog.
Which, after what we were talking about last week, it dumbfounds me that we missed that.
Yeah, I don't know how we got how that happened, but I think Ollie Bierman was the first one to see or hit a groundhog, and then of course Lewis hit one during the race.
Yeah.
So that leads perfectly into Rhyss ranks them. What order do you want to go in this week, mate? Do you want to go top to bottom of the finishing results? You want to go in team order? Do you want to go alphabetical?
We'll go top
age,
to bottom.
top to bottom.
For being the youngest and the oldest. No, I'll go top to bottom.
Top to bottom? All right, let's have a listen.
And again, this is off expectations versus the results. I've given George Russell an A+.
I was just saying, you've changed this week from points-based to it's not out of 10 anymore.
Yeah, to a letter base, and A+ being the highest. And I've put a couple of question marks there, and that'll be my lowest because that's the Mario question mark box as to what the hell happened. Anyway, George Russell in the mystery box. George Russell given an A+. We talk about him being,
I think that's fair.
Yeah, Mr. Consistency, and he's been there to pick up the pieces when other people haven't delivered, and he sat it on pole and then drove to the end. So that was a great race from George. Given Max an A. Again, really, really good drive from Max, seeing the issues with tyres we've had in the previous races. Giving Kimi an A+, again, amazing result from him. And
he got driver of the day too.
And the first time this season that the driver of the day absolutely
actually
made
reflects
sense.
the driver of the day.
Oh, that was I've given Piastri a B+, just in terms, again, expectations versus reality. Charles Leclerc, Lewis Hamilton, giving them B+ as well. It was good to see Charles is doing his thing again out there on the strategy. Went to poo. I'm pretty disappointed for him that they put 2 sets of hards on. So that's not him, though. And Lewis driving in no man's land with 20 points down after hitting the groundhog. Fernando Alonso, I've given an A. That was a great drive considering his nearest competitor finished in 17th. His teammate finished in 17th. The Hulk, I've given an A plus. Absolutely, he keeps dominating in that tractor. I've got a few Bs. So I've got Ocon, Carlos Sainz, Beerman, Sonoda, and Colin Pinto. I've actually all sort of put them into Bs. In terms of that, I was expecting more from Sonoda, to be honest, but he, with the 10
From
place
17th.
No, before that 10 place grid penalty, I was going to say, before the 10 place grid penalty, I was expecting more. So to see him start from not dead last, just starting 17th coming up was a good race. But again, sort of got lucky with a few pit stops and a few DNFs and things like that. Bortoletto, given him a C. I haven't. I've been pretty tough on him, to be honest. I'm seeing the Hulk up in the points and Bortoletto back there. I'm just expecting a little bit more.
This is some Rhyss brutality.
Gasly, I've given a D. Hadjar, I've given a C. A bit of a disappointing weekend for Hadjar in that. Stroll is a big old F. I don't even know what he's here for. Norris, I've actually, and this didn't finish on Norris, I've given an A. That was a really, really good drive until that unfortunate incident. I'm going to say it one more time. I'm glad that he didn't take out Oscar because I feel like his reaction after the race as well, it sort of gave me a lot of respect, a lot more respect than I've had for him previously.
Owning up straight away, I agree.
Yep. Not something that we've seen from him, and stuff that we've said before that he should just be like, yeah, look, I stuffed up, and that's what he did. And very happy to hear it from him in that sort of heated of the moment and all that sort of stuff, because he's probably getting frustrated. He was, behind him, he was fighting. So it was really, really good to see. Now, the question mark boxes I've put there are for Lawson and Albon. I don't understand what Lawson, the team decisions for Lawson, the race from Lawson. I don't understand why they just retired him to save the power unit. I know that he wasn't doing an awful lot, but that's, yeah. And then poor. It was very poor. And then with Albon, just early race thing, I just expected a little bit more from him and less lawn mowing, I guess. They did say that they were going to look into the unsafe entry coming out of the grass, like he had any control over where he was going.
Yeah,
But yes, that's this week's of Rhyss
ranks him. Tough week for some of those participants on the track.
Grinding your teeth, mate.
Well, that's called Rhyss ranks him. It's got nothing to do with me. You have to sleep at night. Let's move it right along. I want to have a chat with you. Bring us back to Tyres. So I made some notes about Tyres while I was watching the race. As you mentioned earlier on, this year's medium is last year's soft. So I've got a few questions here for you. If this year's medium is last year's soft, why is this year's soft so terrible and so much slower than the medium tyre, which used to be the soft compound? So they've obviously introduced a softer compound again, which you would think would be the preferred tyre of choice for qualifying.
I think it just...
But no one wants to use it.
I think seeing what they're happening, I think they just must overheat and turn to crap really quick. So they're not
most
getting...
Most of the teams are only doing like the 2-lap dash.
Yeah, but they're not getting... So you see with the medium tyres, they're able to put on a little bit more fuel. They're allowed to, like Hamilton, for example, has a few times gone through pit lane to cool down his tyres a little bit, and they've put some more fuel into it, and they're doing that sort of strategy to keep the tyre pressure. So I think they're struggling with, getting the tyre pressures, but then the tyre temp. But then I think the soft must just be getting to temperature and literally just turning to crap.
2 sets of hard tyres, is it enough given that we see nobody run the hard tyre until the race? No,
probably not. But and you've got 2 sets of the soft, so it's... Are we going to see a change when the track temps are a little bit lower? We've still got some very hot racing to go through.
But that's when the hard tyre should do its best work.
Yeah, but I mean, for the softs, like, are we going to see them in the cooler temps? Are they going to be used more so than the hards? And then the hards are going to come into play when it's super hot? I'm not sure.
Do we have a problem that the 2026 regs will solve where drivers right now need to spend way too much time managing tyres and not enough time actually racing.
Well, yes. Yeah, we absolutely do. Because it's turning. Look at Monaco. So look at Monaco in terms of getting the gap and letting the driver pit and then get out. It's sort of turning into that in the race where it's like, okay, cool. You've got 4 laps. You got to lap 4 to push as hard as you can. And then you've got 10 laps of managing. So if you
Yeah,
don't get
and
an overtake, if you don't get the position in that first 4 laps, you then got to slow back because of the dirty air and the tyre temps.
and that's what sort of started this line of thought for me is when Lando was not Lando, sorry, when Oscar was sitting back managing heat, managing tyres in the fourth lap of the race.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I'm thinking, okay, well, is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? Like, don't we want to see him, getting up to the back of Colapinto and
Antonelli.
Antonelli? I keep doing that. And Antonelli, getting up to the back of Antonelli and racing with him. He's dropped off because the hot air, the dirty air is turbulent for the cars. They don't handle very well. It overheats the tires, so it damages the race strategy. And so then I'm like, okay, so is that the case, or are we looking too hard at it? Like, is it creating great racing because the strategy is a bigger part of it, and without it, the racing this year would be really, really boring.
No, yeah, no, we're not. I don't think we're looking too hard into it because we've got so many more teams on level playing fields, and this sort of happens. If you look back through the years, this sort of happens in this season. So obviously, we're going through to a big change next year. But we've had years now. Everyone's sort of come up to speed, other than a couple of teams, in terms of having a competitive car. So we generally see more like this season should be more closer racing, should be more wheel to wheel racing and stuff like that. And it's just not because if you're within 2-3 seconds of the car in front of you, you're still getting the dirty air and your tires are overheating. So you need to hold back, and that's crap because you're not. It's
It's not
it's
racing.
it's not racing, and it's look at Antonelli's move on Lando, Piastri, sorry. Yes, that was a phenomenal move. In previous years, you would have seen fourth position come back at you halfway through the next lap.
Yep.
When DRS opens on the second lap, he would have been there and he would have been fighting. But lap 4, he's 2.5 seconds behind him because he just let it back. And then in the tail end of the race as well, he couldn't get close enough to get past him within that. And he's like back markers and things like that, but dirty air, turbulent air. So you're not seeing that racing that I expected to see this season.
Yeah, no. So it's just the questions that came across me. As I said, I was thinking that maybe it's without it, the season would be really boring. It would absolutely be a qualifying season, and wherever you qualify is wherever you finish. But with the strategy and stuff that's coming into it, and the undercuts and stuff, it's a bit more than last season that we saw. And the tyre change, I think, has contributed to it a lot more. And I think Pirelli have actually done a decent job this year with the tyres. So it's one that we'll have to wait and see what happens with the new changes to the car sizes.
I want to see what happens when we start doing like the hot night races. I want to see what the tires do there
Yeah.
in terms of what will the hard do. If the hard's good, like in track temps like this, what's the hard this season going to do with the higher temps?
Yeah. Well, time will tell. Now, we did say that we were going to bring you our 2026 F1 calendars. We've just working through that because there's a lot more tracks than we probably realised that we needed to consider. I think at last count, I had 35 tracks for my Formula One season, which might be a little bit much. But, I reckon I could do it cheaper than they currently do the 24 race season, 24, 22 race season, whatever it is. So we're going to hold that out until our show next week. But, of course, it would be remiss of us not to briefly mention the fact that a Ferrari was successful somewhere in the world, with Ferrari winning their third straight Le Mans 24-hour. So they need to get whoever it is who does strategy over there and get them over to the Formula One team stat.
I was literally about to say, how can you, as an owner within the Ferrari company, go, cool, we've just taken out like the prestigious 24 hours race of Le Mans. How are we not even a competitive Formula One car?
Because it's not run by Ferrari.
Yeah. But there's
That's
people
the
that,
secret.
yeah,
And this is why I said earlier, if they get rid of Fred, they're doing the wrong thing
yeah,
because Fred's not the problem.
yeah, no.
Ferrari tripping over how good they are themselves is the problem, but they'll get there one day. But it made me think, how could we? And of course, there's streaming rights and or broadcast rights and different governing bodies and all that sort of stuff involved. But how could we structure a race weekend that ran from Friday through to Sunday night with 24/7 racing on TV?
I like where
And
this
there's a
is
way we
going.
could do it. So it's completely Australian biased, but starting out with the V8 supercars, which I don't really watch that much anymore, but a V8 supercar style event or a Shannon's Nationals event or something like that. Starting out with that, you could move into MotoGP.
Could we just touch base, go back to the supercars? Could we have a 2004 retro round where they drove the VZ and the BF Commodores?
Oh, we
Their
absolutely we
supercar
could.
race cars.
It could be anything. It would need to be in Darwin
Yep,
for the
that's okay.
time
For the time zone.
to
Yep.
work.
Yep.
Unless we did it over in New Zealand, which you could equally do. But you could start out with a V8 supercar around early in the morning, and then have MotoGP in Italy. Follow on from that.
Yeah.
Le Mans then starts at 2:00 in the afternoon, which is when it starts, and obviously that's going to run for 24 hours. So you start that on the Saturday, you got that right through to the Sunday night, and then you run the Montreal Grand Prix.
Yep.
And we literally could have had 3 days straight, non-stop, of motorsport on TV. And I don't know why they're not doing it. And there's too many conflicting bodies is the reason why they wouldn't do it. And you could work, you could do this more than once. You could work WEC you could work the GT Championship in, I should say. And I don't know why they don't talk about maybe doing this at Formula One weekends where they just have full festivals of motorsport, particularly where there's night racing, like something like Abu Dhabi or, the fully lit track. They could do it at the Pig, but that would be boring. But anyway, in my processing of a Formula One calendar, I thought we could come up with something like that.
Look at talking about Australian motorsport. Look at what the V8 Supercar weekend used to be. We used to have the retro round. We used to have the HZ racing. We used to have the Porsche Cup. We used to have the Supercars 2 Championship, and then we had the Supercars. So
yep.
I
remember, and the Anti.
I remember going to the Supercars at Phillip Island as a kid. I remember being, it would have been, 8 years old, I think it was, running, and they were running the VS Commodores. I was really younger, VS Commodores, but you had the VB Burnout Challenge. So you used to go and you'd have circle work, you'd have drifting, you'd have the motorcycle guys, you'd have GP racing, you'd have Formula 2, Porsche Carrera Cup, and then the supercars. And that was just like the Saturday. And the main race day was still Sunday. So it was never like, we'll just go race day. It was, you were there at 9:00 on a Saturday morning and you'd leave at 5 in the afternoon. And it was a full day of racing. There was always something on.
Yeah, no, definitely those days, unfortunately, I think behind us, albeit I'm sure there's still some massive supercar fans out there. I am not really one of them anymore these days. I'll still watch Bathurst, but that's about it. And speaking of being that's about it, that brings to an end our show for this week. Of course, there is a bye or a gap week as the Formula One circus makes its way to Europe, where we head to the Red Bull Ring. No questions to be answered by Max Verstappen there. He will be racing and then gets 2 points back on his license as well. So that this was really the crunch race for him. But we'll be back next week, and I reckon the show will be a majority of the show will be around that F1 calendar. And anything else that comes out in between. But working out an optimized version of the 2026 calendar and then what we might do with the money as well, because I reckon there's a fair old whack of coin to be saved with what we've put together. But we'll bring that to you next week on the show. I hope you've enjoyed it. Of course, as always, we've loved and would love more support. If you can, drop a like or a follow on whatever platform you are following us on. YouTube, of course, Spotify and TikTok. We are about to get on Instagram as well, and we do have our Facebook page too. So we're across everything that we consider social media. And it'd be great if you could jump on and support us there. But that's it for another week, mate.
Absolutely.
So that's it on the top step. We will see you same time, same place next week. And as always, thank you very much for tuning in. We will see you then.
Thank you. See you next week.
Well, that's a checkered flag. We're at the end of the race. Thanks for tuning in. You kept up the pace. Rhyss and Stu are signing off today. But don't forget to like, subscribe. Drop your predictions down in the comments below. Who's taking the win? We gotta know from the top step. We'll see you next time.
I was like, oh, do we play the Lando outro?